And if you like the video or any other content on the channel, feel free to subscribe. Shield Host Competitive List. This video is going over the Custodian Warden Heavy Shield Host list I've named the Wardens Law. I have two variations of the list in this video. Both have similar game plans. One is all infantry, while the other does include the Custodes grab tanks. I will highlight the stratagems from the Shield Host and the enhancements we will be using in the list, as well as a detailed explanation to why I selected each unit in the list with a general game plan for each unit. If there's enough interest, I can make a video with tabletop gameplay of how to play this list. An all infantry list can be more difficult to pilot. Now let's go over these lists. So the first version of Warden's Law is 2,000 points. It is the infantry version. So our characters, we have a Blade Champion with the Orc Mantle for 15 points. Then we have the Blade Champion with the Panoptic Specs enhancement for 5 points. Then we have Valerian. And for our battle line, we have 4 Custodian Guard. 3 of them have spears and 1 of them has the Vexilla. For our other data sheets, we have 3 units of 5 Wardens. They all have spears and a Vexilla. Then we have 3 units of 3 Venatari. All 3 of them have the Venatari lances. Then we have a unit of prosecutors. And then for our allied units, we have a Custodes assassin with Kyria Draxus. For the grab tank of Warden's Law, it is once again 2,000 points. This time it only has 2 characters, the Blade Champion with the Auric Mantle and the Blade Champion with the Panoptic Specs. 5 Custodian Guard this time, 4 with the spears, 1 with the Vexilla. Only 2 units of 5 Wardens. They all have spears and a Vexilla. 2 units of 3 Venatari with the lances. 2 Custodes grab tanks with the Arachnus heavy blaze cannons. 4 prosecutors, 4 witch seekers, and then once again a Custodes assassin with Kyria Draxus to lead those Custodian Guard. Quickly go over the Adeptus Custodes Army rule. We have Martial Kata. Each time a unit from your army with this ability is selected to fight, select one of the Kata stances until that unit has finished making its attacks. The selected stance is active for it and it gains the relevant ability. The Dankatari stance, melee weapons equipped by models in this unit have the sustained 1 ability. Rendak stance is melee weapons equipped by models in this unit have the lethal hits ability. Then we have the Shield Host detachment itself, Martial Mastery. At the start of the battle round, you can select one of the bullet points below. If you do so, until the start of the next battle round, that bullet point's effects apply. Each Adeptus Custodes model with the Martial Kata ability, melee weapons equipped by that model gain the critical hits on 5 ability. Or you could select each Adeptus Custodes model with the Martial Kata ability, melee weapons equipped by the model gain the +1 AP to their melee weapons. Now let's touch on these 2 enhancements that I have put on the Blade Champions. First one, Auric Mantle. This one is simply just add 2 to the bearer's wound characteristics. Panoptic Specs, this is while the bearer is leading a unit. Ranged weapons equipped by models in that unit have the Ignores Cover ability. For Auric Mantle, with only Blade Champions or Valerian, this was a simple points filler. Bringing 1 Blade Champion from 6 wounds to 8 wounds. I could change this, change the prosecutors maybe for some Witch Seekers, but I want one cheapest possible unit for the home objective holder, so I just use the prosecutors for that. Panoptic Specs is another points filler. It will allow the 5 Custodian Wardens attached to have the Ignores Cover ability on their 24-inch range spears, 10 total attacks, hitting on 2s, strength 4, AP 2, damage 2. Unless this is a shield captain in Alaris armor, this enhancement is no longer really a game changer. We just kind of throw it on there just for a points filler. Now let's move on to the Shield Host stratagems and just focus on the few stratagems that we will be taking advantage of in our list. First one we're going to talk about is Arcane Genetic Alchemy. It is 1 CP and a battle tactic. Any phase just after mortal wounds have been allocated to an Adeptus Custodes model from your army, excluding Psychona models. The target is the Adeptus Custodes model's unit. Until the end of the phase, models in your unit have the 4-up Feel No Pain against mortal wounds. This is the only way we can protect ourselves from large amounts of mortal wounds in this detachment itself. The good thing is we can use this any phase after mortal wounds have been allocated. With the Custodian Wardens once per game for Feel No Pain, we should have a good amount of protection from big mortal wounds attacks. We can still be chipped away with a mortal wound here and there though. We get to choose when to use this, but it really takes knowledge of the opponent's army to take advantage of when to use this stratagem. Another thing in our favor is that this stratagem is only 1 CP, as well as every other stratagem in the detachment. With smart CP management, we should have the CP in the bank with this list for emergency arcane genetic alchemy. The next stratagem I want to talk about is Archaeotech Munitions. In your shooting phase, 1 Adeptus Custodes unit from your army, excluding Psychona units that has not been selected to shoot this phase. Select either lethal hits or sustained hits 1 ability. Until the end of the phase, ranged weapons equipped by models in your unit have the selected ability. This stratagem becomes much more powerful in the Caladius Grab Tank variant of the list. The target is an Adeptus Custodes unit, which allows us to use this stratagem on the Grab Tanks to give them sustained hits 1 on their blaze cannons, who already are very deadly at 48-inch range, 4 attacks, hitting on 2s, lethal hits against monsters or vehicles with strength 12, AP 3, damage D6 plus 2, and then twin links. So that's quite strong. Add some sustained hits on there for 1 CP. We could spike and get an extra 2 or 3 hits. For the most part though, we're lucky to get 1 of those sustained hits on 4 attacks with critical hits on 6s. I wanted to mention this stratagem since if we did have a lot of extra CP, we could burn 1 on the stratagem, but without a large custodians in the list, I won't be using this stratagem much if at all on this list. The next stratagem is also a really good one for the shield host. It is multi-potentiality, 1 CP, strategic ploy. In your movement phase, 1 Adeptus Custodes unit from your army that has fell back this phase. Until the end of the turn, that unit is eligible to shoot and declare a charge in a turn in which it fell back. With an all Wardens unit list, it would be very hard to charge into these units and wipe them out in 1 turn, especially with some smart unit positioning, keeping them safe from a lot of opponents' ranged attacks. If the Wardens do get charged, use the once per game 4 out, feel no pain for that phase Living Fortress. Then in our turn, we can use this stratagem to fall back, shoot, and then charge to re-engage for fights first. Also, will be great to help the Caladius tanks from being tied up in dangerous melee combat. So if something charges into them, we don't want to keep them tied up in combat. We'll just use this stratagem to be able to fall back and still shoot with our tanks. The Venatari already have fallback and charge built right into the datasheet, strikes from the skies, leaving more CP and the opportunity to use this on the Wardens unit or even Draxus and her Custodians unit to take advantage of her potent ranged attacks. The next stratagem we'll go over is Unwavering Sentinels for 1 CP, strategic ploy in the fight phase just after an enemy unit has selected its targets. 1 Adeptus Custodes infantry from your army, excluding Psychona units, that is within range of an objective marker you control, and that was selected as the target of 1 or more of the attacking unit's attacks. Until the end of the phase, each time a melee attack targets your unit, subtract 1 from the hit roll. And this is another tool in the growing toolbox for the shield host detachment. Still annoying, we have to control an objective and then be within 3 inches of that objective marker to gain the access to the stratagem. The Custodian Wardens will be even harder to shift with a -1 to hit roll on controlled objectives for 1 CP. I will be using this every relevant combat phase. And the Custodian Wardens can have a 1 phase per game where they have the -1 to hit roll from the stratagem, a -1 to wound if the attacking weapon is higher than their toughness, and then the once per game 4 out, feel no pain. So these things can be very tanky. And the last stratagem in Shield Host that we will be taking advantage of in this list is Vigilance Eternal for 1 CP. In your movement phase, 1 Adeptus Custodes battle line unit from your army, so that's just the Custodian Guard, excluding Psychona units within range of an objective marker you control. That objective marker remains under your control, even if you have no models within range of it until your opponent controls it at the start or end of any turn. This stratagem, along with Arcane Genetic Alchemy, is why I will always have at least 1 Custodian Guard unit in my list, giving them protection from mortal wounds and a way to help free our Warden units off objective holding duty. We can use this stratagem to sticky our home objective if the opponent has no deep strike threats. The better use of the Draxus and Custodian Guard unit is to provide withering midfield anti-infantry shooting and try to sticky an objective in no man's land, allowing our Wardens to continue to push up the board, with Venatari using free rapid ingress to drop down behind the enemy to crush them between the Venatari and the advancing Blade Champion Wardens. Alright, on to the units now that I have in the list. So the first unit we'll talk about is the Blade Champion with 5 Wardens, the bread and butter of both variants of the Wardens Law lists. These will be the units we will use to hold primary objectives. If running the 3 Wardens, we can put one of the units in Deep Strike Reserve with the Venatari. Ideally, we can get Draxus up onto one of the objectives in No Man's Land to use Vigilance Eternal to free up the Wardens to push further up towards the enemy deployment zone. When running the 3 Wardens, we want to bully the opponent's scoring units. We won't mind at all if the enemy keeps all their long-range guns in their deployment. Without serious effort from large portions of the enemy's army, it will be hard to take us off objectives. A once regained Feel No Pain, a -1 to wound if the attacking weapons has more strength than the Warden's toughness, plus Martial Mastery to give us the crits on 5, the extra AP in melee. It's not a fun unit to engage at all. Shield Host allows us to be a less boring stand on objectives all day and still run lots of different style of lists with the Blade Champions and the Custodian Wardens. Then we have Valerian with 5 Wardens. Valerian is not a must-take for this list. You can take a 3rd Blade Champion if you like. I myself like the -1 AP to melee weapons he gives the Wardens unit, especially with the 2 other Blade Champion Warden units running around taking some of the enemy shooting. Valerian with 5 Wardens is an absolute nightmare to get off an objective if the opponent does not have many melee heavy units. Unless the melee weapons has higher than AP 1, we'll still be saving on a 2+. Combined with all the defensive abilities the Custodian Wardens bring, this is one hard unit to shift with melee. Valerian is also one of the very few models we have access to with AP 3, only damage 2 though. Still, when we select the extra AP with our Martial Mastery for the turn, it turns him into a Space Marine profile killer. Anything with a 3+ save with 2 wounds or less will just be cut down by his 7 attacks. He does not have the reliable reroll charge rolls with the once per game advance in charge that the Blade Champion brings, but with 2 in the list already, I think Valerian does have his place. For one of my favorite combinations, it's a simple combination, but it works so well. Carry a Draxus with Custodian Guard. One of the best unit combinations we have access to. Draxus has some very potent shooting, combined with the Custodian Guard abilities to reroll wounds on objectives the Custodians control, along with the shoot twice once per game. Draxus becomes an anti-infantry monster for us. Custodian Guard are the only unit we have access to that can use Vigilance Eternal, since it has to be used on a battle line unit. The sticky objective stratagem will allow us to be much more aggressive off objectives. Arcane Genetic Alchemy makes the Custodian Guard tougher for the points, while Martial Mastery makes them much more deadly with the reroll 1s or reroll all if they're on a objective they control. And next we have the Humble Prosecutors. We need a cheap home objective holder, even with access to sticky objectives with the Custodian Guard using Vigilance Eternal for 1 CP. We never know if the CP will be needed elsewhere. 40 points is worth the peace of mind of holding our home objective. The Grav Tank list should make screening our backfield much easier until we want to start push the Cladius Grav Tank up the board to help hold objectives or get shot line. Witch Seekers. So these are only going to be in our Caladius tank variant. The Witch Seekers have a scout of 6 inches, able to get to the center of the board quite easily on turn 1. A good unit for secondary scoring for the center in turn 1. They can cause a battle shock test to a unit they hit with their torrent weapons, which can come in handy to stop any defensive stratagems for their target. Here we have the big guns, the Caladius Grav Tanks. These are our best options for ranged anti-tank shooting. 4 shots, each lethal hits when targeting a monster or vehicle, hitting on 2s, strength 12, AP 3, damage D6 plus 2 with twin linked. A very reliable platform for dealing ranged damage. It's quite hard to kill with the 2-up save, 5-up invulnerable, T11 with 14 wounds. Great unit to sit back in our home field dealing damage and screening out our home objective. We'll have much greater range anti-tank with the Caladius Wardens Law variant of the list, but we will have less midfield board control. It will be harder to bully the opponent's scoring units, but it will be easier playstyle with the tanks, giving a more forgiving playstyle. Opponents cannot have their big guns all in the shot lanes all game, or deploy without fear of a deadly ranged alpha strike from these tanks. Full infantry list is the opposite. Unit placement and movement will be key because every shot lane will have a big enemy gun waiting for us in it. But if you have a couple Caladius tanks in your list, the enemy will be much less inclined to keep their range guns out in the shot lanes. And the Venatari. These units are amazing for the current price. 165 points for 3, giving us 15 attacks, hitting on 2s, strength 7, AP 2, damage 2 with lance. Add in martial mastery for an extra AP or crits on 5s. In melee either for the sustained hits 1 or lethal hits from our martial kata. These things blend infantry. They do heavy damage even to the toughest vehicles in the game. All our Venatari will start in deep strike since the data card has the ability swooping dive that allows them to be targeted by the rapid ingress stratagem for 0 CP and multiple times since it is an ability that states the stratagem by name. With the 10 movement speed and fly and infantry keywords, they will be very good for stealing home objectives or stealing away objectives with anything less than a vehicle or a very tough unit on it. The threat of the Venatari appearing in their backlines will keep some of the opponent's army screening in the backfield, leaving less to pressure our wardens off objectives or stop Draxus and the guard from her sticky the objective mission. On to the Custodes Assassin. This is a great unit for getting us secondary scoring as well as a major CP disruption for the opponent's army. She has to be used even more carefully now since we will be putting her in a lot more dangerous positions than before. She has a much more risk and reward gameplay now. For the Grav Tank variant of the list, we can use her to help punch through vehicles with our Custodes Grav Tank or stop some potential defensive stratagems being used on an important target. We can use her as an offensive tool, which she was not able to do before. It was just add 1 CP to the cost of a battle tactic, score some points, that was it. Now she can be a very helpful, annoying utility piece. You're going to shoot an Imperial Chaos vehicle and they have the 1 CP saved up for the Arm of Content to make our Grav Tanks much less potent. Drop her within 12 inches of the target, so now Arm of Content now costs 2 CP and the opponent can no longer afford it. If the opponent has 1 CP, she becomes so much better. Worried about an Overwatch or he fights on death against our Alaris units? No problem. Drop her within 12 inches of the target. Not anymore. Charge away, fight away. The opponent can no longer afford to spend any stratagems. Now let's talk a little bit about the game plan for Wardens Law. This list is made to be tough yet very hard hitting. We want to get on the objectives as soon as possible, but not at the expense of putting our units in shot lanes. We are tough, but we want to wait until the later turns to use our defensive abilities. Getting fully behind ruins and cover will be very important. We do not have a lot of models on the board. We do not want to lose them for nothing. I do not like to expose my army to range shooting or charges until at least turn 2. Turn 1 will be setting up primary scoring. Turn 2 is making sure we gain good future primary scoring. We may have to expose some of our units to do this. Try not to overexpose units. We want to lure the opponent's primary scoring units into us. Turn 3 is usually our go phase. I spend turn 1 and turn 2 securing good primary scoring, and then I pounce on the opponent's units that they use for scoring and damage. Even if I have to take a risk or two or even less secondary scoring for turn 3, the goal is to cripple the enemy so badly that it will be very hard for them to catch us in the primary scoring, leaving us to focus on secondary scoring for the rest of the game. Our go turn has to do lasting damage and cripple the opponent's army to get the most out of an all infantry list. Otherwise, we lose units too fast and get overwhelmed. It's the same game plan with the Grav Tanks, just with a little bit more long range cover fire. We are still not going to be a shooting army out shooting a bunch of different armies in the game, even with our Custodes Grav Tanks. And like always, we'll finish with some final thoughts. These two lists I feel will do great in competitive games while probably being a bit too strong in casual games. Wardens can be very difficult to deal with. Remember, movement is key when using an all infantry version of the list. We will not have any covering fire from enemy ranged attacks. The shield host allows wardens to be much more deadly in melee, making them even harder to shift or destroy. We could drop a few things to fit in a shield captain, although the more I've played the post data slate shield host, the better I get with my CP management, and I find the shield captains are just not as auto-include. They're nice to have, but they're not a must to have in this list. If I were to add one though, it would be with a brick of Alaris Terminators as well, just to take advantage of Archaeotech munitions for the sustained or the lethal in the shooting. Hope you all have enjoyed this video. Subscribe for more Warhammer 40k content, and thanks for watching. Thanks for stopping by.